All right, so I know that the title says Open Source DAO Framework. That is actually the project. It is, but our first kind of build out using that infrastructure is going to be a science publishing DAO. And I think using an example is going to be easier to ground some of the work that we're trying to do. So it is understand that, yeah, what the ecosystem that I'm about to describe is tunable to any number of different DAO structures that would want to use something similar. So I guess starting with that, the science publishing space is currently having a lot of problems. There's a replication crisis, there's a functionality crisis, and there is a affordability crisis. And the problem is that the reputation infrastructure of the academic system is owned by third-party for-profit marketing company. Effectively, these publishers are using the current advertising business models for the truth economy of science, and this has created a lot of perverse incentives. So if you have this group of scientists who are more reputation oriented than they are financially oriented, how do you create an ecosystem of meaningful reputation where scientists can self-manage their reputation? That is tied to financial rewards later on, but the idea is to have reputation be the primary incentive as opposed to having something monetary be the primary incentive. So how do we actually, so the problems right now, you mentioned the replication crisis. So for example, when it comes to cancer, there were billions and billions of dollars that were pumped into cancer research. Not a whole lot of progress was made for about a decade or so. And there was a replication audit effectively. And of the 53 landmark papers that everyone was basing their research off of, they realized that only 6 of those landmark studies were replicatable. So a lot of these for-profit companies are trying to, I've only talked about publication, but they're basically trying to own effectively the entire science workflow. So how do we combat this? Science is naturally decentralized. And so how do we keep it decentralized? So the forum, this is kind of some of my own verbiage, but the idea is this is the scientific record. And this is also the way in which the scientific record is created and disseminated is going to basically manage the reputation infrastructure of the community. And the validation pool is our unique governance infrastructure that that is tied directly with the forum, that allows for the greater chance of having a more sustainable decentralized ecosystem. So some of the ideas behind the system is we have reputation NFTs. They are going to be hyperinflationary and non-tradable. So non-tradable meaning if you have a reputation in physics, you can't just, buy anthropology NFT token, a reputation, right? And then also it's hyperinflationary in the way that because you can use reputation NFTs to vote and to do other types of work, the idea is every single time you make a post or basically publish a paper or create a review, basically more reputation is minted. And if the system is lively, that means that it's a hyperinflationary system where even though you're able to accumulate this reputation and an absolute value that allows you to vote and continue to operate within the system, because it's hyperinflationary, there is very little chance that a valuable network will ever become centralized. So yeah, this is some of the architecture is using a weighted DAG for the actual forum. There's all sorts of implications, mathematical implications that can be worked off of from that particular structure. But I'm just going to jump into some of the basics of what these incentive structures might look like and how I've thought about using the system for the scientific ecosystem. So, for example, you would have in this dotted box over here, this, instead of just having a paper now, this becomes one unit where a lot of the storage of the paper, the scripts that were used to clean up the data and analyze the data, and the raw data itself are basically hashes on a block. And then when it comes to reputation, now you basically get reputation from posting and then also validating work. And validation could come in the forms of citing a paper, or peer reviewing a paper, or replicating a paper. So I guess in this particular case, now if you have these three objects that you can cite other papers, but you can cite more specifically, you're getting insights from the actual interpretation of the data versus you're getting more the basis of the code and such are focused on you're inspired by the works of the scripts of other papers, or just the interpretation. Basically, can be a little bit more granular about it. But the idea is you can also include, there's a bunch of problems with citation these days because that's the main form of reputation for a scientist. The more citations you get per paper that you publish, you get more reputation. The more likely you're able to get hired, the more likely you're able to get further funding. So I guess the idea is when you're still reading a paper, though, you would like to see what the ideas are actually based off of. Sometimes you have 40 citations, but it's hard to actually parse what the actual core ideas are and where they came from. So for the most important papers, you would annotate those papers, and you would get higher citation for higher reputation points for those. While basically for all the context type papers, you would have a limit of how much reputation is ultimately allocatable to those citations, so that if someone is trying to just cite all their friends so that they can kind of create these citation mills to pump up their little ecosystem's reputation, even though they're not actually contributing to the system of knowledge, if it's going to be diminishing returns if they continue to try to cite their friends too much. So, and also this entire time, they're going to be staking the reputation, whether they're validating or they're posting, they're going to be staking the reputation on the performance of the papers going on in the future. So instead of just trying to create a paper that is going to pass through a certain barrier so that you can get a certain marketing effect to boost up your reputation in the short term, you have to think more about long-term effects. Because if, for example, you are found to have your work was suspect, but you were still able to get a bunch of attention, the whatever positive reputation you were able to gain, there's going to be either a sign flip, or it could just be reduced to zero. So I guess the idea is, when it comes to if you have a person whose citations are getting really, really high very, very quickly, there's going to be replication bounties so that we can prevent spending billions of dollars on work that was never replicated. So so that we can add all sorts of different ways in which we can maintain the integrity of this ecosystem by also limiting by clarifying the communication, as well as making sure that we have these cycles of innovation and replication, because currently there's no incentivization to replicate work unless it's out of absolute necessity. So there's a bunch of stuff here regarding how we can kind of eventually build out the make the search functions or the explorer of this forum a lot more interesting. So, for example, using multiple different search techniques and showcasing it in a way that allows people to dig into the knowledge base a lot more accurately, but in a much more creative way, but also have make it decentralized in a way where people can showcase and share their capacity, their search algorithms through the forum. Because at least if we're going to be making this for the academic community, there are a lot of mathematicians and computer scientists that I'm sure would have a field day with mapping out different ways to search through this meta system, meta knowledge system. Finally, the validation pool. This is basically taken from the works of the European Union, who listed 4 different voting topologies to manage governance. And so you have them listed down here, but the main categories are, you have binding and non-binding. And the idea is there is no one governance or voting infrastructure that's going to continuously elicit the wisdom of the crowd and its experts. And so the idea is we need to have multiple voting systems to better match the context of what is going on. Otherwise, yeah, we're just going to find ourselves in a weird space in the future. So on top of that, the idea is you can only choose the different voting structures for different situations. So if you need to make really quick decisions, operational decisions like manufacturing, or sometimes you just need to have the person with the most reputation just make a decision, and then everyone needs to follow. But then you have another kind of decision-making situation where you're not as time-bound. You can really elaborate on sussing out the opinions of everyone. But you can also string these different voting systems in series as well to basically create new voting structures that we haven't really explored before. So all of this is hyper-parameterized and can be, that where any system can.
Jonathan, actually, we are losing you here.
Signal level is low.
Yeah, yes. Jonathan, sorry, we lost you for a few seconds here. Could you just repeat? We're losing you again.
What? Do programmers, and I'm there is.
Jonathan, could you please reconnect?
Am I missing something?
Jonathan, hold on.
Okay, just to make sure that
we lost you for a while. We just got you back. So could you just repeat whatever you said for the past few seconds?
The previous page.
Yeah, the previous slide.
Thank you.
Like this one?
No, before this. Yeah.
Gotcha. So this is basically the governance infrastructure. This was there are 4 different voting topologies that were defined by the European Union, and the idea is for any democratized system to stay more consistently decentralized, you need multiple different voting topologies, because there's no one voting structure that will consistently elicit the wisdom of the crowd as well as its experts. So these are the 4 different voting topologies for different scenarios, but you kind of there are, I guess they're defined by non-binding and binding, rigid and flexible. So like you want non-binding votes at times because you want to basically be able to get people to talk about how they actually feel about things and how they actually think about things. But you have the binding vote where you might earn or lose reputation, the reputation NFTs I was talking about before, where then you need to, it's just you would need to put some skin in the game to where those kind of votes are a little bit more important. So the idea is with these 4 different topologies, all of this is hyperparameterized, so you can at different times choose the different voting topologies, but also you can string together different voting topologies. Like, okay, well, what if you have a non-binding vote for a while followed by a binding vote? So I guess I think Cardano does some interesting work regarding trying to switch between, manage some of these problems versus like, for example, like with the wisdom of the crowd versus the wisdom of the experts. So they have like the assessors have their comments for a little while, and then they have the more expert opinions come in and assess it. And then they have the final kind of like voting rounds. But yeah, so there are, different ways to approach it. But yeah, the idea is having a lot of these voting theories kind of, we're all trying to solve similar voting theories. But yeah, the idea is to not stick with one and especially trying to move away from something like one coin, one vote, because that is inevitably just a short term, that can only work in the short term. And I guess I just mentioned this diagram. We're trying to introduce the idea of governance seasons, where, for example, in the scientific community, you would want innovation seasons and you would also want replication seasons, so that we actually don't waste as much money moving forward on ideas that don't work. So yeah, this is the team, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Great presentation, Jonathan. Any questions for Jonathan here?
Yeah. If there are no other questions, I can go ahead. Satya?
I just want to say that Jonathan's team and ideas are really, really, I think they're very key foundational work, not just in the voting systems, but then also sort of the focus on science publishing. That system is due for disruption, and I feel like he and his team are doing a really great job. I don't necessarily have the question, but I do want to make that comment. I'm so thankful that you're here and that you're putting this work out.
Thank you.
I have a question, Jonathan. A great presentation, great idea to go against the big publishers. So this is a standard pattern we see even when we look from our cancer research. You mentioned the companies who are like the tobacco manufacturers fund the projects for cancer research. So, and they go with strong names like Harvard or the MIT, and they have a very strong brand name, and they establish a lab there, and they go for cancer research, and but their primary product is tobacco. So it is a good thing to think of from an open source perspective, how we bring some perspective in that direction, where the funding company has a strong stake in from a business standpoint to skew the outcomes.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah. So yeah, this is classic problem. And when we look from the reputation standpoint, the question I have is, when we look from a global community, the papers in general are a lot more controlled by the Western community and English-based versus the rest of the world. So how do we engage the rest of the world in this reputation model where they are kind of in a starting phase compared to the Western world?
Right. So this is, so when it comes to, for example, like a professional society is kind of where I'm focused on having the reputation be built, because the reputation within a very small architecture or like a very small group like that is a lot more manageable. As it doesn't, and is also a really, really good starting ground to test out some of these ideas so that we could potentially, build truth economies that can work at larger scales. This is already, scientists are generally already a group of people that know what the problems are and are very much like kind of already vetted in some way, shape, or form for their capacity to want to push the needle of truth a little bit further. So yeah, I guess I have mainly kind of been understanding, like there's an open access movement at the moment that's trying to really help onboard developing countries to be able to innovate much better, because the paywalls that a lot of this work is currently sitting behind is untenable for a lot of countries. So there's also the open guerrilla access movement, like Sci-Fi, that have made that have been super impactful in a positive way, I think, for the world. But at the same time, all of it is illegal, and the idea is we should be above this. This should not be the best solution that we have, even though it is currently very effective. I am so far, the people that are mainly voicing an opinion about the future of science in this more public way have been able to manage that conversation. I am have contacts in Asia, and I'm actually going to be spending a couple months in Taiwan and China later this year to basically really better understand how at least Asia is really kind of pushing forward to, and how about the future of science. So that's information that I don't quite have yet, but the idea of, really kind of bringing the entire world into this kind of idea where we don't necessarily need these global metrics anymore, because quite honestly, they don't fucking work. We need reputation at a more local scale, test it, and then we can scale up from there. But from a decentralized perspective, that's kind of, I think, professional societies and such are a perfect place to start.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan.